Today is May 30th, 2017. My name is BRIANA DERIVOIS, and I am interviewing Henning for the Boston Preparatory Hyde Park Community Oral History Project at Boston Prep. Okay. So, when and where were you born?
I was born in Boston, Massachusetts on February 28th, 1980.
And where did you grow up through your high school?
I grew up next to the Charles MGHT station on the Red Line between Mass General Hospital and Charles Street. So right at the Charles Circle where the bridge from Cambridge comes over into Boston.
And do you have any siblings?
I have one older brother. He's 6.5 years older than me. 3 kids, wife, white picket fence, the whole routine. He's an attorney for a law firm in Boston. He lives in Winchester.
Are all your families lawyers?
No, my brother and I are the only people that are in my family that are lawyers. My mom was a homemaker. She raised us. My dad was a television reporter for a local TV station. All my uncles are non-lawyers. All my cousins are non-lawyers with the exception of one. So we're the only lawyers in the family.
So what can you tell me about growing up?
Growing up, I went to a private school instead of a public school. My parents were going to put me into a public school that was supposed to be at the top of Beacon Hill. You know about the Boston busing situation, the crisis that happened back in the 70s and 80s, 60s and 70s. There was a court order that ordered the desegregation of schools in Boston by busing. So minority students would be bused into traditionally white schools, and some students that are in all white schools would be bused out to minority schools in order to diversify the student body. So it's a court order. The court order cost money, and in order to do it, they closed some schools to make sure that they would consolidate and diversify the student body at the schools that existed. So the school that I was supposed to go to got closed for when my brother was going to go there. My parents moved to the house that they were in, that I was raised, in order to go to this specific school. It got closed, so they sent my brother to private school, and then they ended up sending me to private school. So I went to this private school in Cambridge called BRIANA. I played sports and did all the community stuff in my neighborhood or in the North End and in Roxbury and Dorchester, but the school was in Cambridge.
What can you tell me about your parents?
My dad was born in Brooklyn, New York, grew up in New York City, or in Brooklyn and Queens, went to college in St. Peter's, Jersey City, New Jersey, played college sports, and then went into the Army. And when he got out, he went into television and radio broadcasting. My mom grew up in Newton. She went to high school around here, went to BU School of Communications, and went into music and dance. I can't sing or dance, but she was a music and dance person. They met at BU, they got married, they had my brother, then they had 6.5 years, and then I came, so I think I was probably a mistake. And they lived in the same house the entire time that I was alive. So the house that I grew up in, they owned for 40 years.
And what can you tell me about your experiences in high school?
You saying what I did wrong when I was in high school?
Take it how you see.
However I want. I was a boring high school student for the most part. I played sports. I was the president of the school, like the student council stuff. I didn't really get into trouble until I was a junior in high school. My friends came to my high school from other public schools. So I'd been in private school my whole time. My closest friends now came from public school to the private school. We became really close. They're still my closest friends now. So I went out and learned how to get into trouble when they came to school. I went to school at 7:30 in the morning, studied all day, played sports, went home, ate dinner, homework, and went to bed. That was my routine all the way through high school until the end of junior year, and then I would mix in 2 or 3 days of partying in high school, but not until I was 17 years old.
What can you tell me about your hometown?
I grew up right downtown. There was it was a neighborhood in the sense that there were people I knew that lived around there, but it wasn't a neighborhood like living in Dorchester or Roxbury or Hyde Park, because there wasn't a local school. And where I lived was commercial. So if you walk down the street, you go to the courthouse where you've been. You walk in the other direction, you end up with Boston Common and Public Gardens. So there's residential areas there, but it's not as residential as if you went into a neighborhood around here. So I grew up pretty much right in the city.
Does your family have any special sayings or expressions?
Special sayings or expressions. Let's see. I can't think of any off the top of my head. If you gave me a circumstance or a situation, they sometimes would have a special saying, but I can't think of any right now. Okay.
What is your nationality?
My dad is Irish, my mom is Jewish, so I'm Irish Catholic Jewish.
And you said that you moved to Virginia for...
Yep, I went to college right after high school, and then after college I went directly to Virginia for law school. So I did high school in Cambridge, college in Cambridge, law school in Virginia.
And you said that you moved to Georgia?
Yes, after law school, I clerked for a year. You work for a judge. So I clerked for a year in the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, the 11th Circuit. The United States is broken up into different sections called circuits of the federal court system. So the 11th Circuit was Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. And I worked in a courthouse that would do all the appeals for those sections of the country. And I lived there for 1 year in Macon, Georgia.
And what do you do now for a living?
Right now I'm the chief of the gang unit at the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office.
And why did you decide to become this?
When I left law school, I went to become an assistant district attorney, which is like a line prosecutor at a court in Boston. When you get into the job, you either really love it or you get burned out quickly. And I loved it, and I stayed in the job for 5.5 years. And then I took a break, and I came and taught here because I thought I wanted to try something different. I sucked at teaching, so I taught for 1 year, and then I left at the end of the year. And I went and worked on a political campaign, and I lived in South America and Central America for 3 months. And then in March of 2013, I came back to the office, and I've been at the office since. So the short answer is you have to figure out what you like to decide what you love. And I realized what I liked. I liked the flexibility, I liked having a lot of responsibility, I like working with people, solving crimes and puzzles is fun. I don't like having to be at school at a specific time every single day. I don't like having to do lesson planning. I don't like having to grade students on work. I like mentoring. I like helping kids when they get in trouble or if they have a question about life issues. I do not like having to teach them how to write sentences. I'm not good at it. So the reason I like doing the job I have now is because it's ridiculously fun. I have a lot of responsibility. I don't have many bosses. I pretty much get to do what I want. And I have a lot of impact on people's lives and on the people we try to help.
You said you went to South America?
Yes. After, when I quit teaching, I worked on a political campaign for 7 months. So I left in July when the year ends. July through December, I worked, July through January, I worked for a campaign for a guy running for Congress. And then I went from January or December, January through April, March, April. And I lived in Costa Rica for a month, Colombia for 3.5 weeks, Panama for 2 weeks, and I was in Miami for 2 weeks. Yeah. It was fun.
And where did you go to college for?
I went to Harvard.
Where did you go to law school?
University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia.
And okay. When did you first become aware of mass incarceration?
I first became aware of it when I was a prosecutor my first year, because you would handle a case and prosecute somebody, and if they get sentenced to House of Correction or to state prison, but at that time House of Correction, you saw them get put in handcuffs, or they already were in handcuffs and they get sent off, and you would start to hear the same names over and over again if you worked for a long period of time in the same courthouse. So I went from regular prosecutions, general prosecution, into a unit called the Gun Prosecution Task Force. And when you would go into the task force, you would hear the names of people that you prosecuted back in the other court. You'd be like, oh, BRIANA. Oh, BRIANA DERIVOIS. Yeah, I remember her. She was blah, blah, blah from this old case. And then after the gun prosecution unit, I went into a different court, and I would start prosecuting people in Superior Court, which is a higher level. And sure enough, you'd be like, oh, BRIANA? Yeah, I knew her 3 years ago. I prosecuted her case in the past. So when you were prosecuting cases over the course of a long period of time in a small city like Boston, You start to get to know the same people, and you realize they're repeat players. And now I'm prosecuting people whose fathers I prosecuted 10 years ago. So there's a kid I put in jail for, he's 18, and I prosecuted his father who's 40 years old now. And I know that because on the criminal record of the kid, it says the father's name, and I remember having the father's case.
So what laws and policies do you think make certain things like that happen?
I don't think mass incarceration is a function of a law or a policy. It's a whole lot of things that happen. I actually don't think it's the criminal justice system that does it, so this may surprise you, but I don't think what sets people on the course to getting in trouble long term is always, or is even most often, the criminal justice system. There's a huge misconception and an incorrect perception that we in the criminal justice system we benefit in some way by locking people up, or that we're trying to lock more people up. Statistically, we're actually at one of the lowest points of incarceration in Massachusetts and in the United States that we've been in for the last 20 years. Massachusetts is the second lowest per capita incarceration rate in the United States, but that sort of statistic doesn't get presented because it's a current thing to say mass incarceration is the problem, we need to fix it. And it is, because even though we're the second lowest, we still have Massachusetts, a per capita incarceration rate that's more than like 100 of the major industrialized countries. So there's a legit problem, but it's not going in the wrong direction. Right now it's going in the right direction. The things that we do now that cause it, I think, are, or that send people to prison are education-based. So my real complaint is not with the criminal justice system, because it takes a lot for us to put somebody in prison or in jail. Believe it or not, you need to make either one terrible mistake or many, many, many little mistakes to end up anywhere close to prison. The number of people we have that have 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 entries on their criminal record as a juvenile that still never end up setting foot in prison is huge. You'll see people that you see the first offense as an adult, and you'll look at their juvenile criminal record and it'll be 4 pages long, and they've never done any day in juvenile detention or DYS. So I don't disagree that there's an issue with mass incarceration when it's compared to other countries. I actually think we're doing a better job now than we used to. Mandatory minimum sentences are things that require people to go to prison when they get convicted. There's a lot of dispute over whether those work. I happen to think that there is a value to them. So do you understand what mandatory minimum sentences are?
Actually, can you elaborate on that?
Sure. In Massachusetts, if you get caught with a gun and you don't have a license to carry the gun, and let's assume you're not a kid. So are you 18 or 17?
17.
Next year, when you're 18, you're an adult in the eyes of the law. If you get caught with a gun in your bag, you're going to jail for 18 months, no matter what. So if you're convicted, you have to go to jail for 18 months. And that means you could sing in the choir, you could take care of your little brother, you could have a child on your own, you could be the high school valedictorian. If you have a gun in your bag, you go to prison or jail. So that's a mandatory minimum sentence, which means mandatory, it's required. Minimum means there's a minimum amount of time that you're going to go. And it's a sentence because you're going to end up going and being sentenced. Many, many people dispute mandatory minimum sentences. They don't like them because the logic is there's always some wiggle room. There's always a reason to look at somebody as an individual, and there's always a reason to consider that individual person's situation rather than just saying the law is the law. And generally I agree with that. However, the people that we're targeting with mandatory minimum sentences are a small group of people in the city. If you look at the crime that's committed in the city, there's probably 500 to 700 people, generally speaking young men, who cause the most crime in the city. Those mandatory minimum sentences, by and large, target those individuals for a reason. That's because we want to make sure they get taken off the street if they're carrying weapons, because weapons could threaten the safety of you, your parents, your family. So we're really targeting this small group of people, and when they get caught with a gun, we don't want there to be a wiggle room. We want them to know that they're taking a huge risk to have a gun, and if they pick up that gun and they get caught with it, they're going. And I actually do these meetings. I'm doing one tomorrow called the BRI, Boston Reentry Initiative. You'll sit with the kids and you'll say to them, what happens if you get picked up with a gun? And they'll be like, oh, you're going for 18. And I said, what happens if you get picked up with a second gun? They say, you're going for 5. So they know the numbers, and the numbers aren't deterring them. So what people's response is, mandatory minimum sentences don't work. Don't just incarcerate them. If you know that they know the deal and it doesn't work, why would you still do it? And the response to that is, well, every time we take a person off the street that's got a gun or a loaded gun, that person is more likely than the average person to commit a crime involving a weapon. And that could harm you, your family, your kids. We want that person off the street for a period of time to save the community, to protect them from the risk of the gun. And the opposition says, it hasn't worked so far. Locking up young men, and predominantly men of color, isn't gonna work. Why would you keep doing it? And then the response is, well, there's no other safe way to combat gun violence. You have to take the people off the street and take the guns off the street. So there's not something that's gonna get solved with one paper, one study, one policy, one law. It's constant. I think mandatory minimum sentences serve a function because it does let the young guys out there know that there's a consequence. If they knew they could take a walk every time they get picked up with a gun, it would change them, the way that they think. But I also agree that locking them up without anything else is not a source of, it's not going to be a successful policy on its own. So there are other things you can do either once they're locked up or before they get locked up. That's my long-winded explanation.
Okay, so as a prosecutor, what experiences have you had with sending people to prison?
Where do you want me to start? About the professional part, or do you want me to talk about personal part?
Professional.
You want numbers?
Both.
I would not be able to estimate the number of people I've put in jail. And I don't say I put, like, I did it. They put themselves in jail by whatever conduct, but hundreds? I don't know. Between all the cases, if you count my time as a supervisor plus my time as a line ADA, it's probably closer to, 500 to 1,000 of all the people that I've ever prosecuted that we sent to prison in some form or fashion. That's counting the people I supervise. So like if you and 3 students work for me and you all prosecute 100 cases a year and you put 25 in, that's 75 that you guys have that I would count under my watch. So that's the numbers. The personal part, I've put away men, women, we've had juveniles, younger kids, we've had grandfathers who've done stuff that we've locked up, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, all kinds of races and genders. And then on a more personal level, when I started teaching, 2 years before I started teaching, I started mentoring and coaching in a program in Boston called College Bound Dorchester. And one of the young guys who I prosecuted as the supervisor of the gun court ended up on the basketball team that I coached. And I had to make the decision when I was prosecuting him whether or not to give him a break, keep him out of jail, or send him to jail. So when I started coaching, he recognized me and I recognized him, and we had to have a conversation about it. And that started me on the line of maybe I should do something other than being a DA. I went and tried to become a teacher. Like I said, I was not successful at that. But I started being more involved in the lives of the people that I prosecuted when they fell within a certain demographic. So 17 to 22-year-old black Hispanic men in the city. And I probably have 12 that I've prosecuted that I'm either helping now or in touch with or visiting. There's a couple that I've prosecuted that came out, I helped them with certain things, and they ended up getting back into crime and going back to jail at some point. There's a couple that I've prosecuted that have gotten out and have stayed out of trouble. There's 1 or 2 that I prosecuted, had got out, I helped, and then this actually happened once. I saw the kid committing a crime, and I had to go testify against him and be a witness to him committing the crime, and now he's back in state prison. But we actually talk once or twice a week on the phone. I've gone up and visited him before. So I think I have a more personal connection to incarceration than I used to have before I did that. And that's been probably going on 7 or 8 years, maybe 8 or 9 years. 2017, yes, 2009, 9 years. And I've seen the inside of Concord, Plymouth, Susan Baranowski, South Bay House of Correction, Middlesex County House of Correction, Norfolk House of Correction, Dedham, Nashua Street Jail. I've seen most of the facilities that we send people to in the city.
So how have you seen how have you seen when people get put into prison? has it affect communities in Boston?
Well, it starts with the individual. If a person gets put in prison, it stops their life. And I think that's one of the hard parts to get your head around. If a person has any foothold in being successful, a job, a girlfriend, and I say that's a foothold in being successful because if the young guys that we deal with, if they have a girlfriend and she is reasonable and has her head on her shoulders, she can keep that person on the straight and narrow because girls have authority over guys. It's just the way that it works. If that guy has a child and a girlfriend and they're staying in a stable relationship or even a somewhat stable relationship, that can be something that helps them stay out of trouble. The minute they get incarcerated, that all falls apart. If they have a job, they lose that job. If they have a child or a girlfriend, even though the child or girlfriend may say, I'm going to stay with you, we're going to be faithful to you, it's just hard for that to actually happen when the person goes away. So the life of the person who goes away falls apart. If they put a deposit down for classes for that semester, they lose the deposit. If they bought uniforms and clothing for work, nobody's going to save that uniform for 18 months for them. It's going to get trashed. If they have a car, car's gone, insurance is gone. So their life stops. In terms of the community, you see and hear people all the time talk about a loved one going away. There's terminology they use for it. They don't even say he's going to jail. They say he's going to take a seat. He went and sat down for a while. There's all kinds of slang that people use to describe it because it happens so often. But again, if you're a single mother and the father of your child gets locked up, he can't support you. And so that single mother has to either go out for work, have somebody take care of the baby. There's a trickle-down effect all the way. And then in terms of the community, as you know, there's a huge distrust of police and prosecutors. When somebody you know and you love goes and gets sent away, even if they did it, even if they're 100% responsible for the crime, even if they pleaded guilty, the system and police and prosecutors are held responsible for that rather than the individual. So what someone will say is, my brother got sent away. You sent my brother away. And we've been yelled at, we've had conversations, and you go, I didn't send your brother away. Your brother carried a gun on a city bus, and he had a prior conviction, and he didn't want to accept responsibility. So he took it to a jury trial, and he got convicted, and now he's going away for 5 years. He knew the consequences. He knew the risk to gamble that he was taking. The gun was in his waistband. He was carrying it. It was loaded. It had 12 rounds of ammunition. And the person will say, you did it. You guys did it. The police did it. You locked my brother up. So there's a distrust that builds to an even greater degree when a person gets locked up because it's hard for a family to say this was their conduct and the consequence is theirs. It's easier to blame us or to blame the system and say, your system and you guys locked them up. And the distrust originates with people who either unfairly get locked up or they see a family member who didn't do something who gets caught up. And so again, we try to do, despite the reputation, we try to do the best we can to not have people get caught up on stuff that they're not responsible for. But the system's slow. So there are people that spend time behind bars that don't deserve it. And we sort the case out and things will get cleaned up. And at the end you'll say, we're sorry, but you spent time in custody. And the person's like, how do I get my 4 months back? How do I get my 9 months back? And the answer is you really can't. That also breeds distrust in the system. So anytime somebody gets locked up, whether they did it or not, the system gets blamed for their incarceration.
What can you tell me about your experiences with this, with the 3 strikes law?
We don't have a straight up 3 strikes law in Massachusetts the same way they do in California. So we have some things that are called enhanced penalties. An enhanced penalty can work in one of generally 3 ways. One is called a subsequent offense penalty. Let's use drugs as the example. If you get caught distributing or possessing certain drugs with the intent to distribute, if you get 1 conviction, the next time you get caught with drugs, you get a subsequent offense charge. It basically says you did it once, and if you do it again, the penalties you face this second time are bigger than the penalties you faced the first time. That happens with guns, it happens with drugs, some types of theft offenses. But generally speaking, guns and drugs, those are called subsequent offenses. That penalizes the specific conduct from the case. There's also something called armed career criminal enhancements. If you have been convicted in the past of a violent offense or an offense involving the distribution or possession with intent to distribute illegal narcotics, not weed, but heroin, crack cocaine, powder cocaine. If you've done that in the past and you get caught with a gun now, you're considered an armed career criminal. So there's different levels. There's level 1, which is a 3 to 10 year mandatory minimum sentence. There's level 2, which is a 10 to 15 year mandatory minimum sentence, and level 3, which is a 15 to 20. So if you're a person who has prior convictions for guns or drugs, or for violence or drugs, and you get caught with a gun, you can go for enhanced penalties, all right? And then the third type of penalty that we have is based on sentencing. So if you have ever been convicted and sentenced to 3 years or more in state prison on 2 separate occasions, and you get picked up for a new crime now, you can face the maximum penalty allowed under law for each charge under something called the habitual offender statute. So let's say that when you were 18 years old, you stole a car and you did 3 years. That gets you to 21. You get out, and when you're 22, you rob somebody with a gun. That gets you a 4-year sentence. Now you're 26 when you get out. The next year at 27, let's say that you shoot a person. You've had 2 prior convictions when you went away to prison for 3 years or more on each of those 2 separate occasions. Now if you shoot somebody and we charge you with armed assault with intent to murder, you face up to 20 years in prison for that one charge. The law says if we indict you or charge you as a habitual offender because of those 2 priors, you face 20 automatically if we convict you. So those are 3 different ways our system deals with what you're calling 3 strikes. It's not really 3 strikes in Massachusetts. It's just what we call enhanced penalties or subsequent offense penalties.
What can you tell me with your experience with federal anti-drug policies?
The federal system works differently than ours, and a lot of it, well, the federal system is different than ours. It works somewhat similar to ours in that sentencing is based on the quantity of drugs that you have and what your prior convictions are. The federal anti-drug policies that I think you're probably referring to are back in the late 1970s, early 1980s, in order to combat the crack cocaine epidemic that was going on in many of the major cities. The Congress passed anti-crime legislation that increased penalties for certain offenses. The increase in penalties meant that if you were charged with distributing drugs, you got huge penalties, and they did it in a number of months. So you might get 120 months, which is 10 years, or 240 months, which is 20 years. And when those things happened, when those penalties occurred, and a person got penalized, they would end up going for, say, 3/4 or 4/5 of the time that they were being incarcerated for. So you get 12 years for distributing crack cocaine, you do 10 years, that's a real 10-year knock off your life. There is a strong push against federal sentences like that, because what they basically said was, when Congress passed these increased penalties for crack cocaine, they didn't also do the same for powder cocaine. Powder cocaine, by and large, is something that the white demographic uses more often than crack cocaine. There's still plenty of white people that use crack, and there's still plenty of black people that use powder cocaine, but there was an allegation that Congress passed sentencing guidelines and increases that only dealt with crack cocaine, and that was targeting the inner city black community. It's true in the sense that crack is much more prevalent in inner cities than powder cocaine because it's cheaper, and so the effect of the penalties were black drug dealers got higher sentences on the same amount of drugs than white people did. Just an absolute, it's a fact. So the federal anti-drug policies that you're talking about started having disparate or disproportionate impacts. Higher levels and higher numbers of black incarcerated people for higher penalties, and white people not getting the same sort of impact. Now, with what's called sentencing reform, a lot of people saying, just we talked about the mandatory minimums, don't just lock them up. If you lock them up, it doesn't fix anything. Now people are saying, well, why should you get 12 years for dealing 2 bags of crack, and the white kid in Wellesley gets 3 years for dealing 5 bags of coke? Why is that happening? And now we have studies that show the disproportionate impact. So we do have experience seeing how these things play out. I don't think that there's a right answer necessarily. I don't think that they should just start over and wash the board of all drug penalties, because you can't have people say, oh, if you deal crack or powder or heroin to somebody, we're going to give you probation and pat you on the back and say, good luck next time, we'll try to get you into a program. There's some people who are professional drug dealers. But by and large, the federal sentencing structure of increasing penalties for drug offenses has not worked. It has not stemmed the tide of drug abuse and drug distribution.
And what do you think is the difference with federal drug policies and state drug policies?
You could do a whole class on the difference between federal drug policy and the state. Federal drug policy is aimed at large-scale distribution and larger-scale operations. State drug policy is aimed at smaller-scale users and smaller-scale distributors. So we in the state sometimes will prosecute people who deal in kilos and large quantities of drugs. Most of the time you're dealing with people that have smaller amounts in their house and smaller amounts in a car, all right? And federal targets people like Pablo Escobar or El Chapo, okay? They're going after people that bring boatloads and plane loads into the country. And I think that's really important. Us going after people on the smaller scale level is important, but not for the quantity issue, but for the quality of life issue. So if you live in a neighborhood where somebody's dealing drugs out of a 3-story house at the corner, it affects your neighborhood. People drive up, they get out at all hours of the night, they're beeping horns, they're yelling up to the 3rd floor, there's all kinds of foot traffic in front, people leave crap on the ground. That affects your quality of life. So by and large, drug policy on the federal level is aimed at policy and big picture issues, and on the city and state level, it's aimed more at quality of life and an impact in your community. We're at 31 minutes and 16 seconds, and that's a very nice phone.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Just got it. I had one other question. You said that do you feel like there's other factors besides like laws and policies that affect mass incarceration? What are the other factors?
The number one factor from my experience, both as a 1 year of teaching and being a DA, is that if you can get somebody employed and educated early enough so that they buy into doing it the right way, you have a much better chance of keeping them away from doing something stupid. So if I try to help guys who've been incarcerated or people we keep out of jail, and we try to help them not go into jail. And people will say, oh, it's really honorable what you do. How can I help? And I always say the same thing, get me a job. If you get me a job and you pay 14, 15 bucks an hour, and we take 15 bucks an hour and we do it over 40 hours a week, and we do that over 26 pay periods a year, I can teach somebody how to pay taxes, save some money, and cover their budget. They're not going to crush it like they are out on the street, but they're going to do much better than they would if they were slinging things illegally or doing stupid stuff, because they're not going to have the downside of potentially going to work. The other issue, and this is totally me being an old person and you being a young person, I'm going to just make fun of your whole generation, okay? Your generation has a problem, and I don't know if it's your generation or just people younger than me, but I think it's your generation, has a problem with something called delayed gratification. So my example is, you know what I'm talking about? When I started teaching, this is 5-6 years ago, Mr. Lester took me into the 3 classrooms that I'd be teaching. And he said, they have a quiz this week. The team or the classroom that wins the quiz gets to pick a prize, but I want to show you what the prize is. So we walked into the classroom that won, and he said, all right, you guys won over the other 2 classrooms. Here are your 2 options. Today's Monday. On Friday, you can have a pizza party with ice cream and Coke. All the soda you want, all the pizza you want, all the ice cream you want. That's Friday. Or today, Monday, you can hold the other 2 classes in from recess, and you guys get to go out and have recess alone. And the class all picked holding the other classes in from recess, because they couldn't look 5 days down the line and say, well, if I do this today, if I give this up today, I have a better chance of something much better down the line. And I don't know if it's your generation or if I don't know what it is. That's the thing to fix, because if you say to somebody now, I'll give you a $15 an hour job, or even a $12.50 an hour job, and if you work hard enough, then next year you're going to get $16 an hour, and in 2 years you might get 21. And I guarantee, if you do it the right way, you will not go to jail or prison. But you may not have the car that you want, or you may not be able to buy all the stuff that you want. And having a brain that assesses the risk of going to jail and doing that versus doing it the right way, I need to somehow figure out how to get people to think that way when they're younger. Part of it is like, you could take a whole class on juvenile brain development. People who are 14, 15, 16 don't get delayed gratification. There's people in your class that I deal with all the time. You know them, people in the class above you too. You say to the person, you could do this today, or you could have it much better down the line. And like, today, now, I want it now, immediately now. And they just don't get it. That part, the delayed gratification, if you can teach that in some way, you can keep people away from getting into trouble that'll put them in jail. Sex, perfect example. You say to somebody now, I want you guys to have safe sex, right? You have to practice safe sex now. It's less enjoyable so that you don't have a child when you're 17 years old. And people are like, I'm pregnant. And that's about delayed gratification. Same thing happens with drugs. Don't do this now. When you're 21, you want to smoke some marijuana, that's fine, but don't smoke now, because when you're 21, you're going to be doing lines of Coke and OxyContin. Okay, all right, I won't. And now you have 15-year-olds showing up to school high. So that's my, venting. It's about delayed gratification. Whatever you can do as a parent or a teacher or a sister to get kids to understand that, that's going to keep them out of trouble.
Okay. One last question.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about? Okay, I forgot it. Thank you.
That was it?
Yeah.
Good?
All right.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you
me.
so much. Cool.